Imagine a notebook that can kill a person when their name is written on it. A notebook with that power could determine the fate of humanity, either putting swaths of the population to death or allowing them to live. And imagine that the person who stumbled upon this notebook used it to enforce his brand of justice on those who he deems as evildoers, sentencing every criminal to execution, all for the purpose of creating his ideal of a perfect utopia free of evil. And after eradicating every lawbreaker from the face of the planet, he would then act as the final arbiter of right and wrong, the incarnation of justice itself, and the God over that new world. This is the gripping premise that Death Note explores. It's a story that has captivated millions and is arguably one of the best animes of all time, not only because of the brilliant mind games between Light Yagami versus L, or the ingenious cat and mouse chase between him and the police force, but also because of the intricate ways that the show tackles deep themes like morality, the nature of justice, the question of who has the authority to execute judgment, and if a world where there are no more wrongdoers could even be possible. Now, with that said, for those who have already finished the show and seen how the story plays out, most people would probably set Death Note aside as just another compelling piece of fiction. The story is definitely worth ruminating on, but it will always stay in the realm of mere imagination. And sure, it's thought-provoking and captivating, but ultimately, nothing that could actually happen in the real world. Or could it? What if this story isn't as far-fetched as we think? What if there was really a book that holds the power over life and death? A book that contains a ledger of names that determines a person's final fate and destiny? And what if there was a being whose final goal is to create a perfect utopia, a new world, where all evildoers are ultimately dealt with, and that his justice would reign forever? Would that be too surreal or fictitious? Most would say yes, that seems fanciful or even outright impossible. But in this video, I want to present to you that in reality, there is indeed one such being who can do all these things, and that is the Lamb and his Book of Life. The Book of Revelation, which is the last book of the Bible, talks about what will happen at the end of human history. And at the very final pages of this apocalypse, it says that eventually, God would create a new earth, a new world, where there will be no more death, mourning, crying, or pain. Additionally, it says that on this new earth, a city called the New Jerusalem would come down out of heaven and alight on it. This city will be a place where there will be no more suffering, war, conflict, and evil of any form, but instead, people will live in perfect harmony, peace, and joy in the presence of God forever. But while this is all truly astounding to think about, there is, however, an alarming caveat to this vision of the future, because we also read that not everyone will be allowed to enter into this city. The book of Revelation describes a figure called the Lamb, who has 7 horns and 7 eyes, who was slain and yet is still standing and continues to live. And we read that he is in possession of a supernatural book which contains a list of names of all those who will be allowed to enter the city of God, whereas those who are impure and do shameful or deceitful things will be denied entry. Instead, if a person's name is not found written in that book, they will be thrown into a place called the Lake of Fire. Additional verses describe that this lake of fire is reserved for all those who are judged by the Lamb at the end of time. These are the people who would be found guilty according to the deeds and sins which they have done during their life on earth. It is further clarified that this lake of fire is called the second death, and is the final judicial verdict for all those who did not believe in the Lamb and his gospel, but instead continued to be cowardly, faithless, detestable, murderous, sexually immoral, sorcerous, idolatrous, and were liars, and are thus eternally convicted for their moral crimes. In conclusion, at the end of history, when the curtains fall, we see that the Lamb would have successfully done what Light Yagami could never truly accomplish, which is to create a new world and a city that would be a perfect utopia, totally devoid of all evil and crime, because only those whose names are written in his book of life are allowed to enter. Only those who have repented of their sins and are thus forgiven through the gospel of the Lamb will live in that city, whereas those whose names are not found written in his book will be barred from entering. They will be expelled outside and are cast into the lake of fire, where they will experience the holy and perfect justice of God against sin, meted out in full measure. And, in sharp contrast to Light Yagami, who enforced judgment through his flawed sense of justice by mercilessly taking the lives of people without allowing the possibility for reform, the Lamb, the true light, Jesus Christ, chose to lay down his life on the cross for the guilty, opening the door for forgiveness and reconciliation rather than condemnation. And after he was raised from the dead, he promises that those who would receive his free gift of redemption and eternal life will not perish, but instead will take part in that perfect utopia that he will create, forever reigning as the God of that new world.